Right, so my name is Evelyn. I'm the clinical research lead data manager down below in the clinical research facility, and we're based in the Mercy, but we have a few offices in CUH, and we potter up along to the main campus as well from time to time. So as they were saying, I'm the lead data manager on primarily multinational multi-centre trials, and I'm involved with two FP7s at the moment. Senator is the name of one of them, which is looking at overprescription of medication in the elderly and adverse events. And the other one I'm looking at is a CF-related trial. So what I really wanted to kind of focus on, I suppose, for this session is, what type of things do I need to think about before I even start collecting the data? What kind of things can I put in place to make sure that my data is accurate? You can have the fanciest system in the world, but you need to make sure whatever is going in is accurate. So what kind of things can I put in place to ensure that things are accurate for me at the end? So I'm going to go through as well the role of the data manager in clinical trials, because again, I suppose because of the advent of electronic data capture systems, the role of the data manager has changed over the years. So I'm just going to go through that briefly. Have a look at paper versus electronic data capture systems. So we've heard a lot about electronic data capture systems already this morning, but I'm just going to mention the kind of positive things that we found down below in the clinical research facility. Again, principles underpinning clinical data management, again for clinical trials, what's involved in the data cycle of a clinical trial and what things can I put in place. And again, everyone's favourite document of the day is the data management plan. So I'm just going to reiterate that again at the end of this talk, and why it is important and why we should be thinking about it very early on in the process. So what's the role of a data manager in clinical trials? So I suppose back in the day, you would have pictured a data manager maybe being consumed by mounds and mounds of paper stuck to their desk, cross-eyed, looking at cross-referencing different fields and all that kind of stuff. But that's changed an awful lot over the years, and we're more involved in every aspect of the life cycle of the clinical trial now. Specifically, we like to become very involved in study setup, so we would be involved very much in the development, the design of the case report form, and we'll talk a bit about that again in a minute, because it's another very important document outside your protocol. Database build and testing, again depending on what's required for your particular clinical trial. We'd be certainly involved in end user testing, putting in place edit checks, and again testing those. So what kind of things can I put in place to ensure that my data is accurate? Can I put in kind of date consistency checks? Can I put in range checks? All of those type of things would be discussed very early on, and the data manager would be involved in that. Obviously, throughout the conduct of the style, then any kind of data entry queries, discrepancies that might come up, particularly if it's a multinational, multi-centre trial. Obviously, everyone will have their own internal processes, and that would all have to be thought of very early on as well. Very involved as well with QC and QA, so we would run reports for the quality department, again ensuring accuracy. And a lot of the data management that we do down below in the clinical research facility is central data management. So we would be viewing basically real-time data and having a look if there's any inconsistencies going on with that on a daily basis. Again, if anyone's requesting data, make sure that we follow the SOPs that are in place for that particular trial. Any data transfers, all of that type of thing we would be involved in. And study closeout, then again, query reconciliation, making sure we have everything checked in terms of quality. What are we going to do to lock the database, or if it's a soft lock or a hard lock or whatever it may be. Archiving then, and obviously database transfers. So there's a lot goes on in terms of data management throughout the clinical trial process. So we would be very used to, back in the day, a traditional kind of paper-based case reporting forms, or forms that you were collecting your information on, a lot of paper-based questionnaires, and very simple mechanism to use. But again, there's a lot of issues involved in transcribing that data maybe into databases or into data spreadsheets at the time it may be. It's a very tedious process, and it's very prone to error, because we know people's scripts may be difficult to read, and they'd be prone to transcription error. So as a result of that, then I suppose electronic data capture systems have emerged, and certainly have been utilised a lot, and we're nearly 100% electronic data capture down below in the clinical research facility. So back in the day, if we had any queries, I was up there at the desk looking at reams and reams of paper, and then I had a query, or someone had a query, I had to send it back to the investigator. We had to get the paper to the site in the first place, a centralised place, and then we had to ensure that it was accurately inputted into some type of a database, and that's very time consuming. And when you're looking at clinical trials, obviously health and safety of patients is paramount, and we need to be sure if there's an issue, we need to know if it's happening fairly quickly on in the process. And using a paper-based system, it might take time to notice if a particular site is having a problem with a particular field, or if it's under recruiting, or if it's over recruiting, or whatever it may be. So time availability was a bit of an issue for paper-based system. Again, recruitment trends, if someone was, again, as I said, under recruiting or over recruiting, which is kind of more worrying. Query resolution, again, takes time if it was a paper-based system, and faxing and all this kind of thing. Database lock, again, took a bit of time to get to that point. Data validation, again, with a paper-based system, as I said, you may have transcription problems. People might have been including patients that were not eligible, and we had the handwriting problem. Cost, again, a big cost when using paper-based system, again, was getting monitors travelling, and in my case, it would be to 13 EU sites and multiple times of a year, so there was a lot of cost involved in that. And again, the cost involving in archiving larger volumes of paper was something to take into consideration in the budget. So in the clinical research facility, we use a kind of a web-based system, and again, depending on the trial, it would be a different system for different types of trials. So we would have a web-based platform, we'd say, and the investigator could see certain fields, or they might have certain functions. The data manager may have certain functions. Monitor, again, would be able to look and be able to enter queries or have a look at other kind of patient information. And again, we'd be able to make that site specific, so only the Cork investigator, only the Cork researchers would see the Cork data, and so on. So we use a web-based kind of a system that allows people to use it in different functionalities and make it site specific as well. So in terms of benefits for that, then obviously we use real-time data, and we use central data monitoring, so we have instant access to the data, and if we have any issues, we can bring those to the table straight away. Again, we can report on trends very easily, and we have think about it at the start of the trial, what kind of reports are we looking for, and we can integrate those type of things very quickly. And again, any queries that we might have can be done instantaneously. So the minute the monitor enters something, it can pop up on the other side, and the researcher can investigate it straight away. So that inevitably leads to kind of a faster database lock for ourselves. Quality, again, we can put in kind of, I suppose, specific checks that will allow data accuracy at the point of data entry. And that has certainly improved data quality and data integrity. And at the end of the day, the data is the most valuable part of the clinical trial process. So we need to make sure it's accurate as possible going in. Now, governing all these things, of course, we have a load of regulations and guidance documents have been developed. And in terms of clinical trials, one of the main ones is the ICH GCP thing. That's a good clinical practice guideline, and that was developed in 1996. And then with the advent of electronic data capture systems, there's been development of, we'll say, industry guidelines, technical guidelines in and around that. And one of the first ones was this thing called 21 CFR Part 11 compliance. And that was the first one that kind of said, right, we're using these electronic systems, we need to start thinking a bit more about specifics. And it gave kind of specific guidelines on certain aspects of electronic systems. And since then, there's been lots of different other ones come on board to try and help standardise, we'll say, technical guidelines and help people understand, give people a better understanding of things. So the first one is the GCP one, and everyone that's involved in a clinical trial will be very familiar with that, but it's essentially composed of 13 principles, but only 2 of those really specifically apply to data. And the first one is confidentiality, obviously ensuring your data is confidential and patients' data is confidential. And the other one then is that your information is reported, handled and stored in a way that allows it to be accurately reported, interpreted and verified. Now the first one is can be challenging enough if you're using multinational, multi-centre sites across the EU. You have an EU directive, that's fine, but within every country then you have specific data protection laws. So again, very early in the process of developing your case report form or your electronic system, you need to be thinking about those things. And particularly if one of your primary outcomes needs something like a full date of birth, we might be in trouble in certain EU countries you can't put a full date of birth. So if one of your primary outcomes is needed for a calculation or something like that, a full date of birth, then that's something you need to kind of think about. Handled, stored and recorded. So those are things now that we need to kind of think about in a bit more detail. What can I do to make sure that my data is handled and recorded and stored in a way that makes things more accurate for myself? So as I was mentioning, the 21 CFR Part 11 compliance, that's the thing that kind of looks a bit more at the electronic system. So it's looking at what do I mean by an audit trail? Can I change for access rights? What is a system control? What about electronic signatures? So it kind of goes through that in a bit of detail, and there's been reiterations of that since it was first developed, and the EU have their own as well. So that's the first mention we say of electronic data capture systems. So what I really wanted to go into then in this afternoon session was what is involved in data in a clinical trial. What do I need to be thinking about before I even start the data entry process? So obviously you have your protocol design, and it's very important obviously to involve your biostatistician in your protocol design. Having a chat to your data manager and your IT as well very early on in the process is very important. So the next important document then is the case report form, and I cannot underestimate or emphasize, please spend the time on developing your case report form and making sure that your major stakeholders are happy with it, and that it's very clear and accurate, and make it as efficient as possible. So I'm just going to go through what kind of questions you need to ask yourself when you're designing your case report form. So we have our protocol. We need to basically have or develop some type of a tool that allows us to collect the fields that are required to answer the question. So it needs to be collected in an efficient manner, and it needs to be collected in an accurate manner. So you need to, if you can at all, if you know the person that's going to be collecting the data, or if the person's on site, and if you've got a lot of, say in our case, it would be a lot of clinical research nurses that would have a lot of clinical experience. You need to kind of involve them in the development of the case report form very early on, because they're the people on the ground. They're going to know if it's something is going to be possible to be collected or not. So they need to be involved, and we like to involve them very early on in the process. And there are other things then that we can put in place from the data management point of view that allow for it to be more accurate at the time of data entry and more efficient at the time of data entry. So again, I know I was kind of saying this a lot already, but only data that's specified in the protocol or the proposal should be collected. You will get a tendency to be wanting to collect, you know, the colour of Mary Murphy's jumper when she came in for the first visit. That may not be important in the overall outcome of the trial, unless it's some psychology colour coordinated trial or something like that. So we need specifics related to the proposal or the protocol, and you need specifics that will answer the study question, and that is it. The more you put in, the more errors there can be, the more queries there will be, and the more time will be involved. So we need to make it as streamlined as possible and try and cut out as much as possible. So when will the data be collected? So again, I'm going to have a baseline visit. I might have a number of different follow-up visits. Do I need to have the same amount of data in each visit? So those things need to be thought of. What forms will need to be designed? Again, if you're going to have a lab form, what does that need to look like on the electronic system? Can I integrate my lab values? Can the lab system itself just automatically be integrated? All those type of things need to be thought of as well. Who's going to collect it? Again, if you can involve your research nurse, your research assistant, or whoever it is in designing the case report form, that's very important, because you know there's no point in having your electronic system, we'll say in the first form it's a blood form, whereas in fact it's the last thing that the research nurse would collect, and they do other things first. So we need to have that chat first as well. Are the validated instruments available? So are you using a validated questionnaire, the scales, of all those things being validated? And if so, you would be integrating those into your system as well. And again, how is the data going to be analysed? Having that chat is very important. Having the chat with the biostatistician, do I have enough fields to answer the question? Am I collecting them accurately? What way do you want the data exported in the end? Do you have a specific preference for a specific type of database or a statistical program that you're going to be using? So again, having that chat very early on, very important in the development of your case report form. Now, we've heard a lot about metadata already this morning, but again, it's very important for a lot of stakeholders in in terms of data management and in terms of who's using the system in the first place, the data manager, the IT people, and the analysis at the end, and again, the future users. So defining your variables is very important. And again, say, for example, in that first, this is just something I took down off the internet, this is the data consent. We're all very aware that that's a date and the format is day, month, year, but you'd be surprised again in the EU or US trials, then that might be an issue already before you even got onto the second field. And you would put in specific changes or ranges checks or consistency checks, you call them edit specification checks, and that we would have in the system. So say, for example, the date of consent couldn't be after the second visit or something, it would be flagged up in the system. That wouldn't be allowed to happen. So again, it's ensuring accuracy at the point of data entry. And again, ranges, for lab ranges, is meant to be between X and Y, then we'd have a flag if it was outside of those things. So again, we can do a lot of things early on, and having the thought process again at the start of the trial or before the trial even begins. What are the possibilities? What if? You can't account for everything, but you can certainly take the time about it and involve multiple stakeholders in that decision-making process as well. So again, looking at your study outcomes, what is defined in the protocol is what you should put in your case report form. Can you use validated questionnaires or scales? Again, making sure it's user-friendly is very important, because you don't want to, one, annoy the patient by asking them 700 million questions that are irrelevant. And you want the system to be as user-friendly as possible for the person entering the data. So there are different things that you can put in place to make sure that that happens. Again, you might need to consider, does your database need to import other data from another source? So if you've got a central lab, do I need to import it? If you're going to be using other research institutions or other research groups might be analysing data for you, do I need to import that automatically as well? You might be using EEGs or ECGs and all that kind of thing. Do I need to integrate all that? So all of that can be thought of very early on, and that's a very important thing to do. So the other thing that needs to happen with your database in a clinical trial is you need some mechanism for your queries. So you need to make sure that your monitor can ask their questions. And you need to think about your reporting tools. So what do I want at the end? How many reports do I need through the year? What type of reporting functions do I need to have integrated into my system at the start? And again, you need to maybe think about coding and dictionaries and all that kind of thing, again, to help ease data entry, but also to help in the analysis at the end. Another thing a database for clinical trials can do as well is study management. So you might need to integrate triggers for follow-up visits. You might need to integrate triggers for completeness of data if something wasn't complete, or if something needs to be a mandatory field. You can integrate all those things to make sure that they're done at the time of data entry. And of course, then you've got your clinical database, which collects all your clinical information. So again, having the chat early on with the data manager or IT or stats about functional aspects of your database, so validation rules. Again, we've mentioned ranges. Can I put in skip? So if it's a male patient, do they need to answer the female specific questions? Inconsistency checks, again, dates, making sure that they're all in alignment, and having your queries report. And again, a more important aspect is your audit trail. If I remove something electronically or delete something, do I know what originally it was? Do I know who deleted it and why did they delete it, and what's the new data in place of it? So all of that needs to be done and integrated electronically as well. So there are a number of different considerations to take into consideration very early on in the process. So do you need your clinical trial management system to be integrated? Do you need your electronic data capture system? Some people are using handheld devices, iPads, iPhones, all this kind of thing, particularly for patient questionnaires and all that kind of stuff. Interactive voice response systems, do they need to be integrated? Do you have another clinical research organisation that needs to integrate their data into your system? Do I have a central lab? Otherwise, you've got the issue of multiple sites with multiple labs, multiple ranges, multiple units going on. So that needs to be integrated as well. And again, the output, what are my reporting going to be like? What format do I want my transfer of data at the end to be like? So all of those things need to be taken into consideration. Now, this is an example of an FDA reviewer who was trying to figure out the answer to one particular question. And unfortunately, this particular trial decided it would be a great idea to have a database for demographic information. Medical history information was a different database. The lab information was a different database. The adverse event information was a different database, and their meds, or their medical history, medication history, again, was a different database. So they had to print out 36 pages and stick them together to try and figure out the answer to the question. And we don't want that situation occurring. So we need to think, what do I need to integrate very early on in the process to ensure the ease for everyone involved, whether it's an auditor, reviewer, or whatever. So we've talked a lot about data standards and all that kind of thing today, and data dictionaries. So I'm not going to go into that in too much detail, but they certainly do increase efficiency. They streamline data collection, particularly on multiple sites. If you're doing multiple sites, it's making sure everyone's on the same page. It does give a higher quality of data. And again, it's something that can be very easily integrated very early on in the process. There's no problem integrating any dictionaries, coding dictionaries, data sets, or whatever it may be, very early on. So that needs to be taken into consideration. And again, it provides long-term storage, means archiving, and we've mentioned that already today. So the other thing that we need to think about then is the data collection. So I put all the time in place developing all this kind of thing. That's grand. I've done my protocol, I've done my case report form. We need to ensure that our data is going to be collected in an accurate manner. So we need to go through the process of it basically and pilot all that. So we need to make sure the validity of our data collection. We need to make sure where we're getting our data from. So where exactly are we going to be getting our data from? And we need to have processes in place for our data collection and transcription. And what if there's any queries throughout the trial. So you need to test your data collection mechanism first, thoroughly. You obviously need to have an operating procedure in place for that, and you need to train. So at the end of the day, you can have the fanciest system in the world, but you need to take the time training the person to make sure they're collecting the data accurately in the first place. And again, throughout it, you need to monitor, or you may need to audit it as well. And again, we spend a lot of time, or there can be a lot of delay at the start of a clinical trial, particularly a large clinical trial, in testing, retesting, and retesting the database. It could be very quick to develop the database, but it's a third of the time to develop it, it's a third of the time to test it, and then you're spending another third of the time retesting it. So do not underestimate the time it may take to actually get a fully functioning live electronic database capture system that is meets your needs, we'll say. So after your piloting, then you're going to make sure everyone's trained and you have a record of that, and you're going to kind of put in place things that kind of make the training system a bit easy. So can I use user guides? Can I do some type of a video? Can I do online training? Can I do a webinar? All those type of things we have in place down below in the clinical research facility. So it depends on, again, what specifics you need for your trial. Again, ensuring that you've got an accurate audit trail. Again, you can have a lot of fancy electronic data capture systems that wouldn't meet the requirements for a HPRA trial, for example, in terms of audit trail. So making sure that your audit trail is accurate is okay. So the procedures then as well, again, reiterating that point and making sure that everything is traceable, that's very important. Again, there are certain specifics that you need to have in place for electronic data capture systems. So we need to maybe train a bit on the importance of security, so we're not exchanging passwords, ensure nobody's giving their password to anyone in here. List of individuals, again, who can access the database, what kind of forms can they access, and again, when they leave, because people leave work or whatever, move on, so we need a system in place to remove access if that needs to be. So we spent a lot of time doing this and developing all this, so we need to ensure that the data entry process is accurate, or what things can I put in place to make it easy for the person that's collecting the data. Now, I put this up all the time just to ensure that we get the point across, I suppose, that you can't ever underestimate the person that's collecting the data's ability. Okay, so we need to put in place basically systems that will ensure data accuracy. Staff change, we need to retrain them, all that kind of thing needs to go on. So we need to put things in place. Or is there any other thing that I can use to collect data that will make it easy for people? So different types of data entry exist. So we can do optical mark recognition systems. There's lots of stuff like that. You can do the manual data entry. You can remove free text. Obviously, you know, for analysis, free text isn't the best thing to have in place. So can we put in kind of coding systems? Can we put in dictionaries? Can we put in just check boxes? Can we just put in a specific list of answers rather than allowing free text, because it's difficult to analyze it in the well. And again, having the SOPs in place. Again, user guides help with that. Online training guides help with that. Data dictionaries, all that type of thing help with that as well. Again, ensuring your backups and things are archived accurately is very important. And again, having the chat very early on with the IT department to ensure that that's okay is very important. So we need to put all these things together, and so there's a lot going on in the background in terms of data management. So we need to piece all these things together. And one of the things that we use, and we've mentioned it already several times throughout the day, is the data management plan. So again, it does make informed decisions, and it can be used to anticipate and avoid problems. It avoids duplication as well, data loss, security breaches. If you develop these procedures fairly on, it allows consistency, and again, it ensures, which is part of your GCP, accurate, complete, reliable data. And again, really in the end, it does save time and effort, and it does make your life a lot easier. We've mentioned already the different grant funders that have data management plans as a kind of mandatory component of their grant application. In the HRB grants this year, there was a mention of data management, not a data management plan, but there were certainly specific paragraphs related to data management that were required. And again, we've mentioned Horizon 2020 obviously as well, depending on what stream you're involved. There's the pilot data management aspect of it. So again, the kind of, data management plan, nothing to be afraid of, just something to put in place to think about whether you're doing a trial or not. It's irrelevant. Knowing what your data is important. So we have a kind of a one that has 5 basic themes, which is just a description of the data. Are we using any standards? What are the regulations around it? How are we going to share it? Who's going to access it? And what's the long-term preservation? It doesn't need to be a highly technical document at all, but it needs to be thought of, and it needs to be thought of very early on. It has to be somewhat dynamic in some way, because some things wouldn't have to change throughout the process of the clinical trial. That's just the nature of clinical trials. Please consider the data management plan early on in the process. And again, really all I wanted to say is that there are facilities around UCC that will help you in your decision-making process in terms of data management. The IT department, the biostats that are around UCC as well, help all of this process and make things more efficient and more effective for yourself. So please just ask if you're thinking about doing something, and the earlier the better, really, is all I wanted to say. So that's me, I think, for my talk. So any questions? Thank you very much. Does anyone have any questions?
Yeah, in your presentation, you put a lot of focus on data reliability, accuracy, and quality. So I'm just thinking, what method do you use to identify and manage the yellow areas before they become red? And by that I mean, what data is not collected that maybe should be collected, or what data is partly collected but not meeting the collection standards? You understand what I mean? So how do you approach that?
So in terms of deciding on the fields, anyway, is the first thing. You need to decide on the fields, and if we can push specifics to the fields, that will ensure accuracy. So if it was a specific, with a medicated drug that we need to select, we would have a list of specific drugs, and we would have a code attached to those, and there would be multiple levels involved in ensuring that they're selecting the correct drug. If the drug is not on the list, then they can't add it manually. There will be no adding of anything manually. So everything needs to be thought of up front, more or less. If something is outside of a range, so if some patient has some type of a sodium level outside of a range, then that can be added. But there's a thing in the electronic system to say this is outside of the range. If a thing would flag up, and the researcher has to say, yes, this is outside of the range, and they have to give a reason of why it is outside the range. So there's a number of different things that we have in place that do allow data that's not within the range to be entered, but it's flagged to us. And then from the data management point of view, we can see that in our system, and that may need to be brought to the weekly meeting to discuss it, because it might be a problem with the ranges. Like you could be in a multi-centre trial and some site might be having some type of sodium level outside those ranges. Maybe the ranges were wrong. But again, if you had taken the time to discuss it amongst all the stakeholders and all the people involved in the site that are collecting the data, then that shouldn't have occurred. But sometimes it does. Sometimes the ranges might not be right, and that might be a problem with the field. That's something you might have to deal with. So the other thing then would be internal date consistency checks. So we would check that. We would use ICD-10 coding, SNOMED coding, ATC coding. All of those will help again across a multi-centre trial to ensure accuracy. And again, it's all about training the staff. They need to be aware of what they're collecting. They need to understand the trial, and they need to have the facility to ask the questions. So it's about making them comfortable. So we would have user group meetings every week or every month for users that are actually physically entering the data and taking the principal investigators actually out of the picture for that and making it a bit more of a comfortable environment for them to be able to ask the questions. So there are a number of different things that we would have in place to ensure accuracy, but we do have central data monitoring as well. So we would in real time check as they're entering it in. They have to confirm that they're okay with that particular page of data. And as soon as they've confirmed it, it runs the checks that we have in place, and things could flag up that way. If it gets through that, then we have a monitor that does the central monitoring that will check it, and we can do it in a real time kind of situation to ensure accuracy. So there are a number of things, but they need to be thought of early on, and you can't think of everything. There will be things that you won't think of. So that's that.
Any other questions?
You have a set of requirements that you need clinical trials to meet.
Yeah.
You didn't say anything about recommending particular, which I wouldn't necessarily expect, particular tools or approaches.
Yeah.
But what is your strategy on that? Presumably, it's easier to recommend things where you have a knowledge of them working successfully in trial than others.
Yeah. So it depends again on the type of trial that's going to be involved. So in terms of systems, like say for the FP7s, for the development of the system, that was outsourced to an SME for the development of the system, and they would have specific standards within the company. But again, you have to be practical. I mean, not everyone that has, like someone that has a trial in 9 patients isn't going to be able to have the high specy 100,000 to 250,000 euro system in their office. So you have to be practical, but I think the kind of 3 core things that we would always tell people about is you need to ensure that your system deals with confidentiality, data integrity and accessibility, and has to think about those 3 things in terms of the data. So you need to think about data is really only ever going to be in 3 forms anyway. It's only going to be transmitted, processed or stored. So we kind of think about those 3 things with respect to the 3 data things. So there are a number of open sources that we've recommended to people for the smaller trials, and we try to get them to think about the fields again and the integrity of the data early on in the process. But it depends again on the type of trial and the setup that they have. So like
do you basically just, so you absorb for most trials, especially the larger ones, you sort of absorb the costs of when they pay for the clinical trial service, as it were, you've already absorbed the costs of the system that you run.
Any other questions? Done.
Yeah.
And you mentioned, say, ICD-10 coding.
Yeah.
Are there any other standard ones for healthcare?
There's loads of them. There's loads of them depending again on the system. So ICD-10 coding is a kind of a medical history type coding. There's ATC coding for drugs. There's SNOMED coding. There's lots of histology, different types of coding for that as well. It depends really what you're looking for, but there are a number of different coding systems that need to be looked at. But the kind of principal ones would be ICD-10 would probably be a very common one. MEDRA coding is another one if you're looking at adverse event reporting. SNOMED would be a kind of a popular one that we would have as well, and ATC coding, which is complicated and you would need, your primary outcome would need to be something pharmacy or drug related in order to integrate that system, because it's based on a data repository, the first data bank repository of pharmacy coding that changes every month, so you need to have the capability of upgrading it and updating it. So unless your primary outcome was drug related, I wouldn't be going down the ATC coding route. Sorry? You would for just the general type of data, but anything from medical history or any kind of medically related data, we would use the standard coding that's available just to unify it, because most of the EU countries that we deal with would have that kind of coding system in place. A lot of them have electronic health record systems anyway that have Metro coding, and they have ICD-10 coding in place anyway, so those things would be, they would be very similar, familiar with those things anyway. So yeah, we try to keep them as EU happy as possible for FP7 type E trials. Okay.
Any other questions?
Yeah.
Sorry, could I just add one thing, which is for, in the more general case of biomedical research, if you use things, there's something called BioShare, which is an EU-wide initiative, and it's, you can use, there are tools available, so say with I2B2, which I mentioned, which is used in Brisket and is an open source tool, you can pull in different, any of them, you can essentially let the researcher choose which is the best ontology to mark up their data and to match with other data. So there's sort of lots of approaches.
There's a question.
Just coming from a library perspective, knowing when I'm doing stuff with people, research, etc., it's to do a literature review before they begin, and one of the things I propose as the main use of literature review is to save time, or to save repeatability by simply, if you find a study that is exactly the same or parallel or very close, to be able to actually take the methodology and just adapt it very quickly.
Yeah.
If you're doing a lot of ad definition, you know, sort of working from the very beginning and working everything. Do you ever kind of do that kind of idea that you're doing to actually just save time by having parallel?
Yeah, that would be encouraged. That would be encouraged amongst the researchers as well. I mean, there's no point going out, you know, spending all your time, you know, developing something that's already in place, that's already been utilised by a number of different centres. I would have been involved in, say, national kind of database developments for neuroendocrine tumours, the liver, pancreatic, and there's a lot of European centres that are already collecting that data. So that would have been looking at their fields, looking at their coding, integrating it and matching it to an Irish setting. So certainly they would be encouraged to go there first, if you know what I mean. Yeah. So yeah, we would do that down below.
Any other questions? No. Thank you very much. Thank you. Well, we're done for today. I'd like to thank all our speakers, particularly Martin for sending in his presentations and sort of recording them on the fly after having family issues. Thank you for everyone who travelled from outside of Cork. Again, can I just ask, I know it's a pain, if you can fill out your feedback forms. We appreciate it, and Foster will appreciate it as well. A reminder, the presentations and the recordings of the sessions will be available through the Foster website. We're recycling the badges, so if you can drop them off at the registration desk, that'd be great. For people that are staying on till tomorrow, we're all meeting for drinks in the Weir Bar, which is in the Lee, for those that aren't from Cork. It's in the Lee Hotel, which is about 5 minutes down the road. From Rita, is it from 5? Yeah. Yeah. So if anyone wants to walk down with us. So thank you very much to everyone for coming down.